In this video, we're going to talk about the good, the bad and the ugly about our property hunt here in Portugal.
Let's go. We thought it was really important to share with you guys our experience of our property hunt so far. So we have been looking for a home for a really long time, and what I would say is I don't think we're unrealistic in terms of our expectations. So what are our expectations? Okay, so we want to be in a relatively close proximity to the school. We're happy to commute, but we don't want to spend an hour trying to get to the school every morning and trying to get home every evening. What are the requirements we want?
So we've said like a half an hour radius from the school.
Yeah.
We have said that we don't want to be more than an hour away from Lisbon.
Yeah.
And we've said that we want space for our kids to be very active in it. We've
Definitely
got very
a
active
garden.
boys.
Yeah.
And we've said we want a 4 or a 5 bedroom house so we are able to have a family over.
Yeah. So I don't think that's unrealistic, especially in Portugal. There are lots of quintas, which are sort of not working farms, but places with a lot of land that used to be used for farming, but they're no longer used for that purpose. So there's lots of square meters and a good sized property. So we've been looking at plenty of those.
Mm-hmm. And what we try to go through here is try to come with some examples on what we have seen, really, to try to prepare you for what can meet you. And so we start with the ugly, just to get that out of the way.
Yeah.
Because luckily the rest of it is the best.
Well, fortunately, there is not much ugly, we are pleased to say. But we did have one really ugly experience, and it was no fault of the real estate agent. It was no fault of the owner. Unfortunately, it was a sad set of circumstances. So the situation was, it was a bit of a sad story. So the owner was quite wealthy. He'd been really successful in business, and unfortunately in the downturn in the market in 2008, the crisis hit and he lost his fortunes, and unfortunately his property ended up being repossessed by the banks. And of course it was very emotional for him. Then the property subsequently ended up being purchased by an investor, and in between the property exchanging hands between the owner and the investor, there was a lot of bad blood between the person who'd built the property for his family and the banks for repossessing. Now, we don't really have at this stage a good understanding of, at what point the banks repossess properties, if they're quite sort of lenient and they give people, lots of chances, or whether they're quite strict. But in this case, the owner had a lot of aggression. He was very upset, and so what he did is he took out to destroy as much of the property as humanly possible. He left the door open, he left all the windows open, he smashed through all the pipes so the pipes were exposed. There were dead animals, there were birds living inside the property. I mean, this is a real extreme case. There was bird poo everywhere, the gardens were overgrown. It was an absolute shambles, and the sad thing is you could really see what the property used to be in its heyday. You could see that it was a real, it used to be a really beautiful property, and a lot of time and care taken into getting it to what it was, but unfortunately it was just a poor set of circumstances. And the owner, the investment company who took it over, had given very strict instructions to the real estate agent that he had to use old pictures, so they weren't representative of what the property actually looks like today.
Yeah.
And not only that, but he was expecting a pretty penny for this property. And when we got there, we were really excited because obviously we were seduced by the pictures, ended up getting there. It was nothing like what it was online. You know, we were really disappointed, couldn't work with it. And in fact, it was a tear-down property. It was unsalvageable, sadly, and that's a really ugly side to the property market.
And what the investment company had done there, which is kind of unfair, is he had told numerous real estate agencies that they had to use this set of pictures that he had provided, and they were specifically not allowed to take pictures themselves.
Yeah. And not only that, but they weren't allowed to adjust the price. So they were expecting a price which would,
for a functional property, not for a tear-down.
Yeah, exactly, for a property you could move into. So unfortunately, we had to kind of say goodbye to that. That wasn't suitable. On a positive note, one of the great things about our property hunt experience is we've met some wonderful people. We've met some great real estate agents that are very passionate and diligent and committed to their profession. And they're not just about their commissions, but they also want to make sure that you have a great experience here in Portugal. And they're realistic about the prices of the properties. And they're not just trying to sell you a dud, if you like, or sell you a property which is going to, is in poor condition. They really are working in your best interests, and some of them are so sweet that they remember your children's birthdays and they send you messages and things. So we have had, many examples of real estate agents who are exceptional.
So let's try to go through some of, let's call it the bad properties, the properties that we wouldn't go for whatever reason, and what scenarios that could be.
Yeah.
So in many cases, when you see a property for sale, in many cases the location that's named on the actual advert is incorrect. So that can be, we have seen examples of where it's up to 10 kilometers in the wrong directions, which is over a 20-minute drive from what location was provided on the ad, which can be highly frustrated when you think that you are going to see a property in a specific location that you like. Furthermore, especially when we can only really talk about the areas that we live in, so in the Lisbon region. So that's about an hour north from Lisbon and all the way down to Lisbon. But what happens here is that because we have the Atlantic Ocean, we have the cold breeze coming in, and that creates a lot of humidity in properties.
Yeah.
So when properties are not being heated up properly, because heating is expensive and Portugal is not a super rich country, so a lot of people don't use heating as much as they maybe should, and even when they do, then they may not have as much ventilation as they should. So there's a lot of properties here that are damaged by humidity, where you see black marks on the wall, and where it just generally doesn't feel too good to be inside of it, which is one thing that we rule out many properties upon that. And the bad thing with that is that in many cases it creates a permanent damage to the property. So it literally means that you can't do anything about it.
We have, on the positive note, seen a few households who invest in dehumidifiers, who invest in ventilation. So they make sure, for example, that they put up mosquito nets on the windows and the doors, which means they can let air free flow throughout the property, and that ensures that you're avoiding some of these humidity issues.
The next thing that I think we should talk a little bit about is because Portugal have created an opportunity of anyone outside of EU to come into Portugal because they're investing in property. So around the price point of 500,000 euros, which is the minimum requirement of you getting a golden visa, there's a lot of properties that are built for the sole purpose of getting the visa, which means that it can be really poor quality, which means that it can be overpriced with 100 to 200,000. We've seen examples of, compared to like just a few miles away. It's usually built for just like a show. So it's like when you see them 5 or 10 years old, they're in very poor conditions, very cracked, and not built to be lived in, which is something to bear in mind if you're coming to Portugal to actually live here.
And yeah, that's a really good point, because what you get with often these properties that are investment properties is a lot of the owners live overseas, so they've never been lived in. And what that means is that there are a lot of things under the surface that, had you lived in the property, they would have been spotted. So, you know, as you said, there can be issues with subsidence, there can be issues with mold, there can be issues with the quality of walls and or lack of insulation, I would say. And so, you know, it's really sad. We saw this one property which we thought was absolutely stunning, and we actually have spoken personally to the owner who lives in Europe, and, you know, had bought the dream property in a lovely area which is not too far from the beach. And unfortunately, because it's never been lived in, you know, the condition that it's and this person's not been able to get to Portugal, and unfortunately the condition that it's now stands in means that there's absolutely no way now that this person wants to sell that they are going to be able to command the price that they want it. And this is over €500,000 that they want to command for this property, which is full of damp, thin walls. No one's ever lived in it. It's in the middle of nowhere, and sadly, it's just left to stand there. And it's going to take a long while before it probably sells.
Yeah, and that's the thing, because in that particular case, that's actually someone who have been here and bought it and enjoyed it to some aspect. But what happens even sometimes for the golden visa purpose is people buy it without even being and see the property.
Yeah.
So they literally go around with like a video call and see the property and then decide to buy it as a process of getting their visa, which just end up being that a lot of people are not critical about the property quality because it's more for the visa than for the property.
Yeah, absolutely. And the upshot of this is that, you know, many properties are significantly overpriced because of this reason. And so, you know, we've got experience of the property market in the UK and also in Denmark, and, you know, the difficulty is that there is no comps. You know, in the UK, for example, you have websites that allow you to look at the historical value of properties in that area, so you can really do your research about what properties are supposed to cost. And here sometimes what we find is it's a bit of a kind of finger in the air, you know, there's no other properties like this and therefore this is the price, or in some cases, oh, we want to attract foreigners, this is only for foreigners, this is not for Portuguese people, that's why it's priced at this level. And that's quite hard to hear, because, you know, essentially what's happening is Portuguese people are being priced outside of the market, and, you know, and that's quite hard to come to terms with at times, isn't it?
Yeah, and all of that just rings a bell back from the 2008 crash, when properties were being sold for more than what they're worth. We see examples of houses that might take maybe 300,000, let's say, to build a property. They're on land that would cost 50 to 70,000, and they're being sold for 600,000-700,000. Yeah. So they're at a massive marker, and lots of people get away with that with a really poor quality property. So it can be an overheated property market in those circumstances. So if you feel like it's a property that could fit under a golden visa, you need to be extra vigilant.
Yeah. On another positive note, if you are flexible, so if you don't have to be near a specific school or in a specific area, the great thing is there's a fantastic stock of properties out there. So if we didn't need to be restricted by area, there's a lot of good stuff out there.
There's a lot of good pockets.
Yeah, there's a lot of good pockets, lovely areas, depending on what you're looking for. Of course, if you're in, you know, the areas with lots of foreigners or the areas by the sea, obviously there's going to be a premium for those properties. But if you're looking for something which is more near, you know, the country or an old quinta, you know, then there are some gems out there and there are some deals to be had. So that's on a positive note for us. And yeah, as we say, the only thing that's stopping us from going for one of those fantastic deals that Portuguese people can also afford, by the way, is the fact that we're restricted by radius and wanting to be close to the school. So that's the only thing. But there's some great choice out there.
And that's one thing that we are very careful about when we are coming here to Portugal, is that we only want to buy something that could be sold back to Portuguese. We don't want to buy something that might be 100 or 200,000 euros overpriced, even if it's cheap compared to London. So we are extra careful when we come into the property market and really try to look at the details of what does the market tell us from this area, and would a local person be able to buy it. Also, so that we are able to sell it afterwards and not to be unfair to the market.
Absolutely. And the other thing we look at is, is it rentable? Because there may become a day where we don't actually want to sell our property, but we might want to rent it out. And, is whatever we owe on the property, is it affordable for people to be able to rent it, whether that be local people or people coming here on holiday? So it's definitely something we look out for. One of the surprises for us when we were looking at properties, as well as so one of the surprises that we found when we were looking at properties is that some of the properties that we have been to visit have been very close to mobile phone masts or substations, and research has shown that they can have negative consequences when it comes to long-term health and well-being. And so we're very mindful of making sure that we don't opt for a property in those areas. The rules seem to be a little bit more relaxed here when it comes to building rights.
Well, sometimes it's not only just substations which are less harmful, sometimes it's whole transistor stations which are massive and have shown in many countries they don't want to build in a big radius of those, and they're very much still built here, and they, in many cases, at least what we have spoken to real estate agents, that don't see it as a problem, even though it's clearly a health problem. Another thing to look out for when you go and visit the property, and that it doesn't necessarily have to be bad because it's fixable, but it is to check how much electricity is there in the house, because it might be the case of where they maybe have like the hobs in the kitchen from like a gas bottle, they may not have AC, and you might want to go in and change that, put in a new kitchen, have an electric hob and like AC and electric heating and stuff like that. And there might not be enough electricity in the property, which can occur an extra cost to have that installed, if it's even possible. So some of those things that you need to do your due diligence on before you make a bid into a property, so you're just aware of those costs and the logistic challenge of actually making that happen.
That's a really good point. And we also try to understand why the owners are selling up. We want to understand to see if their stories make sense, if we feel comfortable with what they're saying to us, and just to make sure, because sometimes there can be lots of different reasons why people are going, but for us it gives us the reassurance that we're not walking into a minefield of problems when it comes to the property and the area.
Yeah, and one of the tricks that we've done that I actually forgot about, but I just remembered now, is we sometimes go into Google Earth and just look up the satellite pictures over the last 15-20 years. And sometimes by confronting the owners or the real estate person with that data over that, it isn't 10 years old, the building existed 17 years ago, and then you get a very different story than what you were initially presented with. So by doing your due diligence up front before you even go and visit the property, just by going into Google Earth, looking up the location of the property, and just go into the historic pictures of the satellite, and just check out the facts. Understand the story of the property, understand why it was built, understand why the last owners are moving, and just get a feel for what kind of property that is.
Definitely. I think that's definitely a key point, and something which has been interesting. And I will say that a lot of the times it's not the real estate agent's fault. Sometimes they don't always get accurate information from the owners, because the owners are not always individuals. Sometimes they can be owned by investment companies, and investment companies, as we all know, only have one objective in mind, and that's to sell for as much as humanly possible. So we don't want to get caught in any traps there with that.
Yeah, and also the land registry here isn't that easily accessible as we used to from the UK. So you can't just check as much information up front when you're listing a property. So they have to fully trust what they've been told by the owners, or maybe it's a property that's been inherited, and it's the kids that have to pass on information, and it's second-hand information, and then a lot of things can go wrong in that communication. So always double check and get to the bottom of it, and then you will find a lot more information upfront, so you don't have to buy something that you later regret.
For those of you who have been watching us for a while, know that we love our questions. So we do, as usual, have a list of questions that we normally ask. So we will leave those down for you in the description box. And I hope that you find those helpful.
So we just have a last thought that I just had about the property. When we go through a property and we just view it, we always look for so you are responsible for finding out if we can live in the property, if the bedrooms are big enough, if the kitchen is workable, and if we can actually be there. And I'm responsible for trying to be not emotional about the property at all. And my job is to try to find out if there's anything wrong with the properties. So I look for any damp on the property. I look
structural issues.
Yeah, any kind of cracks in the property, and try
electrical issues.
Yeah, try to understand where those cracks come from.
Yeah.
And we recently saw a great house that we were considering, but the wall in one side of the property had fallen down, and that meant that there was cracks on the first floor, which of course would mean some major repair if it could be repaired. So those are some of the things that you really need to look into, like be critical about the damages that you see in the property. Also, just because they might not be built for the wear and tear necessarily, if they're close to the ocean, for example, maybe they're not built for that kind of weather and they will build a bit quickly. So you really need to make sure that you're checking that, so you're sure that if you sell it in 10 or 20 years that it's still good.
Yeah, that's a good point, because actually we saw a property right by the beach, and it's only been built in 2019, but it hasn't been lived in. I think it's been used for Airbnb, but we went to have a look at it, and it's shocking to see the level of deterioration that has occurred in just a few years. It's actually quite shocking, and knowing that, first of all, that it's at a premium price point, given that it's close to the water, but it's never been lived in, and they are expecting an awful lot of money for a property that's already showing significant signs of wear and tear. There are cracks. There are, it just hasn't been looked after. There are weeds growing everywhere.
And it's a property where if you just blindfolded me and took me into the property, I would think it was 20 or 30 years old. Yeah. So it's very easy to be deceived and to think thinking differently than what
it's very easy to get seduced by a new build, for example. So these new fancy buildings that look like your dream homes with the fancy swimming pools and and your nice decks and your viewing points and lovely, fantastic, and it's all great, but definitely pay attention to the details of this property, because often they're built quickly to sell, and they're not necessarily built to last.
And also, even you say that there's many good real estate agents, there's also some real estate agents that just says, regardless of what problem you mention to them, that everything can be fixed. Everything can be fixed. Regardless if the roof has flown off, everything can be fixed. And just be realistic when you hear the feedback. Think for yourself, and don't trust the information you get too much. Question everything.
Yeah. Don't fall into the trap, because it's such a beautiful country here, and you can get carried away. If you had a couple of glasses of wine and you're so excited about being in the sun and finally getting here after you've worked hard, and now it's your time for you to have a completely different lifestyle. You can get seduced, and we've seen it time after time after time. We've met so many great people here, and unfortunately heard some real horror stories of people who've just fallen into the traps. They've overpaid, they have been misinformed.
But that is also because, for example, like in Denmark, if you buy a property, you have 6 months where it's the previous owner's responsibility if you discover any damages on the property. In Portugal, it's wildly different. It's bought as seen.
Yeah, sold as seen.
Yes, so whatever you see, whatever condition, and as soon as you've signed and wired the money, it's your problem. It's no longer the previous owner's problem. And you can't get any insurance for that, as far as we have been informed. So you really have to do your due diligence before you even get to the point of making an offer. And so don't jump too quickly into making an offer before you've done that. Rather see the property 5 times, go there with carpenters, make your research well before you jump into that. Because it's a great responsibility. It's a gamble when you put that amount of money in under those conditions. So when you found a property that you're happy with, you've made an offer, let's just try to talk about some of the costs that will occur after you've made the offer on that. So first of all, there's some property taxes. They vary a bit, but they are usually between 5 to 8% purchase tax. So that's tax you have to pay as you're buying it. Then on top of that, if you're mortgaging it, there will be some mortgage fees. So that's usually maybe €1,000 or whatever, depending on the size of your mortgage and all of that, or what bank it is. Then more than that, the banks here could also require you to have something as a life insurance for the amount of the property. So let's say that you're two owners, a couple, then might ask you, and let's say that you want a house for, let's just say 500,000. Then they will ask you to have a life insurance for 250,000 and 250,000. So you have two life insurances that you have to pay on top of your mortgage that is forced for you to have the mortgage. That is just an extra cost that you have to bear in mind. Again, these numbers depend on how old you are, what area you're buying in, what bank you're dealing with, and all of that. But it's definitely something you just need to bear in mind. Also, if you one day are selling it again, there's three things that you need to think about. A real estate agent costs 5 to 6% in commission of you selling the property. Any profit that you make have to be taxed with capital gains tax in Portugal. And then usually there is a 1 to 2% lawyer fees when you're selling a property. So definitely make sure that you're buying to keep it for a while so the property price can go up.
So during our property search, there's been a few things that we thought that we realised we need to be mindful of. One thing is barking dogs, which I believe we mentioned in our renting video, and it's just something to be mindful of. I mean, I don't mind dogs, to be honest, but if they're barking all day or they're tied to a gate and they're left all day, and frequently we'll be working from home, it can be quite distracting, and and also we feel really sorry for the dogs. We just want to let them loose. So something to think about there. And then the other thing is again what we mentioned on our renting video about the re-urbanisation of many areas across Portugal. There are lots and lots and lots of new builds happening everywhere, and they just they seem to spring up overnight. Literally, everywhere there's a crane and there's cement and everything going on. And so just think about the dust and all of that sort of thing, and you might want to talk to your local council to find out what plans there are in place for building in the area that you're thinking of buying. And if you see empty plots around the property that you're interested in, just be mindful that at some point someone will buy those plots, and you will have to deal with the what goes with building properties. The other thing that we have found as well is we've looked at properties where most of the surrounding homes are holiday rentals. And bearing in mind that we have young kids, we don't want the constant parties and the hen nights and all of this. I mean, we're up for a good time, don't get me wrong, but when we've got young kids and they need to get to sleep and and we need some peaceful evenings, then it's just something that we consider.
And it might be nice that on a regular Wednesday when someone wants to party, that we're actually able to get to sleep so we can work the following day. That's the one thing to think of when you come to Portugal. Many see Portugal as a holiday destination, and we have to live here, so it's one thing that we have to think of. Another thing that I think you forgot is some neighborhoods where they do build a lot, and they build a lot of nice houses, and they ask a pretty penny for those. We're easily up in 500,000 to 600,000 euros, and some of those areas are really far out, first of all, but also all the neighbors are very low priced houses. So it might be the neighborhoods that are really, really tired, and then you have your brand new house next to a neighborhood that's need renovation. And it's just something to bear in mind, that don't get too overexcited about a property, because you're not going to last long in a property hunt here. That you really have to have the right frame of mind and get to know the areas before you jump in and just see a bunch of houses.
Absolutely. You definitely, to get through the property hunt here, we've had to have a lot of patience, resilience. We've had to not be afraid of challenging, ask lots of questions, do lots of research, and make sure that we don't fall into any of the traps of getting something which is overpriced or something which we're going to be sad about later down the line. We want to get something where us, our children, our families and friends will be enjoy for years to come. So we are taking time over the decision. We're still positive about it. And, you know, we are still on the hunt, but I think we're a little bit closer to getting what we're looking for. But, you know, it was really important to us that we shared the journey that we were on and give you a really honest view of the process for us so far.
And what we've become to learn, just on a final point here, is that we thought that our property hunt would be like 2 or 3 months.
Yeah.
We've become to learn that it's probably 1 to 2 years, because we want to get a family property that lasts us for many years, and we don't want to make a bad decision on that. So don't stress out if you can't find what you're looking for immediately. Just have some patience and get to know the country. I think that's the essence of it.
Yes, we've met many people, many foreigners and many locals who say that it hasn't been an easy ride for them in terms of finding their family home either. So, you know, the key thing here is to remember that if it does get frustrating, you're not alone. Bear with it, have patience. The hope is that you have met some great real estate agents along the way who will also have patience with you, and you know, you will eventually find exactly what it is you're looking for. Thanks for watching, and I hope it's been helpful, and we'll see you in the next one.
See you in the next one.